Hey, Planeswalkers Mythras here. Hope you're doing well and staying safe. Today, as you know, is one of my favorite days. I am doing a best of one tier list just for you. Now, first off, a couple of things that are a little bit different here today. We are doing a short slash skinny version of this tier list. So what that means is traditionally I've done 20 plus decks in the past. So hang on, I'm still going to do that. But in order to get you some of these decks faster, some of the tier lists faster, I'm going to break it into two parts. So this was one feedback from the community that I received and absolutely want to jump on that for you. So today we're going to go through about 12 decks. You'll see, for those of you that are new or don't know what a tier list is, you'll see this tier list. A tier list is a kind of stack ranked order of, in this case, Magic decks. So I use a tier 1, 2, and 3 system, and then I try and follow a sort of bell curve where there's a low population of decks in tier 1, a middle to 75% in tier 2, and then tier 3 again is the rest. Now, by any means, that does not mean that a tier 3 deck can't get you to Mythic or something that's not on the list. So keep that in mind. Now, if there are decks that you would like to see on the list going forward, please shoot them my way. Always happy to produce and do new content and spotlight other things. It's something that I love. I do have a targeted list of decks that I do plan to bring forward and continue to do so, as well as a lot of those top decks for you. So with that said, Planeswalkers, that is one change for today. Before I talk through some of the other pieces, so I already covered what a tier list is. I do plan to talk through observations, and then obviously we'll go through the tier list. And then last, I'll do a deeper dive into each of those decks. But before we go and keep moving further, I just want to say thank you as always, whether this is your 100th time, first time here to the channel, or watching this video. I just want to express my gratitude and say thank you. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel down over there to continue to support. You can also like the video. You can like me on Facebook, and you can follow me on Twitter and Twitch to stay up to date on content like this, and stay tuned for new decks as well as more tier lists coming your way. All right, Planeswalkers, so we did talk about what a tier list is rather quickly. The other thing that I do want to add about a tier list, again, is it's kind of that stack ranked order. So today, you can find the tier list down below, so you have access to it right away. That stack ranking also maintains, so the highest deck in tier 1 and so forth is going to be the better deck, so that was an additional ask. Here as well, the deck furthest on the left or right, or whatever you want to call it as I go across the screen, is going to be the more valuable deck, so we can talk about that as well. So without further ado, we're going to hop into it here. I'm going to show you the deck list that I have because I've already mentioned it for you down below. So here we go. I think this is going to be pretty important for us to take a look at and keep an eye on. So you guys can take a look here before I go ahead and walk through it. But before I do so, I also want to talk through my observations as well, because this is pretty important. We've seen a lot of things happen here. We had Zendikar's Rising release. We had the Uro Ban. So we will cover a couple of those pieces first, because I think it's always important for us to discuss those things. So with that said, what are some of these key observations? So first off, I do produce a blog and maintain a website. You guys can absolutely check that out. It should be available for you down below if you'd like a little bit more detail. Additionally, if you want all the collective lists in one place, the website's going to be the best spot for you to do that. So and by lists, I mean all the deck lists, not the tier list. The tier list will be there, but the actual deck lists. Normally, you guys know that it's in each of the videos in the description. So, all right. So what observations do we have here? So first, I call it the Uro shift. So Uro was unable to escape the ban. No pun intended there. But with that said, we can see quickly off Zendikar's Rising release how quickly the meta shifted around Omnath ramp. It was a huge I'll just say kind of sinkhole for players to go and play, whether it's the cool new shiny thing or just that it was the best deck. So statistically speaking anyway. With that said, now we see Uro kind of gone. The biggest thing I can say, particularly in the space, so even though it was a pretty quick ban, I would say it has allowed for a ton more diversity in the field with the decks, which we can cover here quickly within the tier list. So as we drive through this tier list, we got Mono Red, Tier 1, we got Dimmer Rogues, Tier 1, we got Mono White, Tier 2, Teamer Adventure, Tier 2, Boros Your Cycling, Tier 2, another Omnath Adventures at Tier 2, Mono Green at Tier 2, Rakdos Midrange here at Tier 2, and then rounding out our Tier 3, we have Is It Tempo, Esper Doom, Selesnya Counters, and Jeskai Spells. So first off, again, this is all best of one. Second off, in terms of these decks, this is the tier list for these decks. And I say that's in terms of relative to each other and relative to the field. So there are things like Gruul Adventures here, or Orzhov Aggro, and Mono Black Enchantments. Things that I'm working on, still covering, or haven't covered, or have covered, that just aren't in this list, but this is all relative. So I want to make that call out there. It doesn't mean that if we add more decks that isn't Tempos is a tier 3, it could become a tier 2 kind of a thing. So those are things to keep in mind. And as I mentioned, again, all these decks could be viable options for you to hit Mythic. So obviously we know Selesnya Counters runs at 62% in best of 3, but again, not necessarily best of 1. It's still got a decent win rate, but it does not mean that you can't get there. I found a really, really nice success in Platinum earlier this week with the deck, and rose rather quickly with it. So just giving you some other observations there that I think are important. So now that we talked about that tier list, I do want to continue with some of these observations. So first we got Landfall. So Landfall was a new mechanic with ZNR. We see this in the Rise of the Cobra. We also see this in some of the Gruul type decks and other Landfall pieces that we have. Now, the key call out here is it also slightly pushed out Mutate to some extent. We don't really see a lot of Mutate left, so that's something to keep note of. Now, it is still in Mono Green, which is very important. I do think Gem Razor is still one of the most powerful cards in the format because of its ability to mutate, destroy enchantments, those kinds of things, and artifacts. And obviously their reach and so forth makes it a pretty powerful mechanic within Mutate. Next, I want to comment here on Sacrifice. So Sacrifice still lives slightly through Rakdos midrange right now because the discard with Kroxa. It's not a true Sacrifice deck, and I'm calling this out because it's important. I think there could still be a space for Sacrifice. I was thinking it would be in Cleric's Orzhov or something like that. So we got to keep our eye on that space. But right now, it's Lurrus was in the league of its own for a long time. So was Sac, and now it's really not. So this is kind of the beauty of Magic, this ever evolving form, particularly with the bans and the new sets and those kinds of things. It keeps it fresh for us. Next, we have Ramp. So again, we talked about this being impacted with Omnath. We also have Confounding Conundrum now, which can slow things down. It's pretty important to keep that in mind as well. It's not as powerful as it used to be. I think with some of those other pieces, but it's still a good option. It's just not at warp speed, as I like to say. Two more pieces that I do want to talk about. So interesting enough, as I like to cover these things, and you guys know we can go back and look at the last few months that I've done this. I think understanding the time trend and trends over time help us become better players, helps us assess the meta better, and also allows us to find, I don't want to say inconsistencies, but good paths to make it to Mythic or to maintain or be competitive. So I think this is a good call out here. So this one that I like to talk about is monocolored decks. We see the rise of mono red aggro here. We're beginning to see the rise of mono white aggro as well. So there's been a huge influx in some of the decks. Same with Cycle and Rakdos midrange in particular. And that has to do with that Red Bull tournament that I talked about. We're seeing a lot more of those decks, particularly, I'll say, mono white. I won't be surprised if mono white actually kind of gets in that tier 1 spot. And really in that top 5 section there, the win rates are pretty close. These aren't real like 1 basis point or 1 full percentage point difference. It's not that big of a spread. So they're pretty tight in that space. So I expect a lot of things to shift around here based off of the ever-evolving format as well as the meta. So potentially that could be an option to target into a tier 1 deck. So we'll see. Those are a couple of key pieces. So going back to what I was talking about on the monocolored decks, M21 was heavily monocolored. So we had mono red, we had mono white life gain. We also had mono black aggro. So the closest thing right now is kind of this black enchantments thing. And then additionally mono green. Those were all very top contenders. And we kind of saw it go away with some bannings and then came back here now. And that ties into my other piece, these two right here, Teamer Adventure and the Uro Cycling. I call them the oldies but goodies. They're here to stay. So Teamer Adventure was off the races right away with Omnath pre the smashing of the two together, Omnath and Adventures. Boros Cycling was also played a lot actually in best of 1, but now we can see it in a more competitive stance at best of 3, again coming out of Red Bull. But the key piece here again is with that banning, they're starting to see that resurgence, particularly the cycle deck. So I think those are all good, important key considerations for us, and a little bit of history and a little bit of timing and a little bit of trends there as well. Before I go into the next portion here, Planeswalkers, again, I just want to express my gratitude and thanks for your support. Please, again, feel free to subscribe to the channel down over there. If you like the video so far, please like it. Additionally, you can like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Twitch. I just want to pose a question here to the community. There's some, aside from trying to break these tier lists kind of into 2 sections, in terms of a light model and a more diverse deck list here. One, let me know your feedback on that. Again, this was something that I'd received and I would like to change up for you. Additionally, I'm going to do it for best of 3. But I have some thoughts around some of the stuff that I talked about, because there is one other trend that I am mentioning here that I've been noticing, and I can't, for the life of me, I haven't decided if it's a tournament competitive top-down information thing or if it's actually going the other way. But I've noticed some trends within the tiering system that are different by nature of those tiers. Obviously, some decks that don't work and others do, but I have began to see certain decks slowly start make their way up, which is kind of cool. And 2 callouts here. One is definitely mono white aggro in the last week, and number 2, again, observationally, has been Boros Cycling. I just like to call it York because you get access to these other things. So I know many of you are new, so please let me know if that's something that you'd like, and I'll try and figure out how to create some nice content around that for you. All right, so next piece here, I'm going to go into each of the decks. As I mentioned, the tier list is available for you down below. It's stacked ranked. You have access to it. If you got questions, comments, let me know. For those of you that are new, I will go into each of these decks at a high level, talk about them, and also why they are called what they are called and some of those mechanics at this point in time. So let's take a look here for our tier 1. We got mono red aggro. So here, the big piece that we have is it is mono red, so that's the reason. So we only use mountain. Aggro really focuses on the really front end of the deck, and most of the back end things are kind of our closers, but they're like quick closers. When you're dropping your fourth land, most likely it's hopefully lethal or turn 3 kind of a thing if you can swing it. So that's mono red aggro for us again at tier 1. Next tier 1 we have Dimir Rogues. This particular deck, I know with mine I didn't run Zereth. This one has Zereth. Just so that you know, excuse me. Oh, my eyes are getting fried from staring at my screen. Apologies. So this one, you got again the traditional Rogues deck. So Dimir is the blue black color scheme for the guild. And here the big component is these rogues. Now the hidden piece in this deck is it's also kind of a mill deck. So that's an absolute opportunity for you as well. And then again, we got our lovely, lovely sideboards here for those best of threes. So that's the next tier 2, or sorry, tier 1. Into tier 2 here. So we have mono white aggro. I think this is going to become a pretty powerful deck. I've seen a couple different versions, particularly in best of 1, so I'd keep an eye on this one. For a while, mono white life gain was a very, very good option. It hasn't necessarily gone away. It's not as strong as it used to be, but I could see some synergies here coming out. So something to keep an eye on. With that said, again, you know, this particular one, again, aggro, really, really fast deck. The things that we have in the back end here are really about closing. Plays well into that. And then obviously our sideboard options here that we've talked about before. All right. Next, we have Teamer Adventures. So Adventures deck, as I've mentioned, particularly revolves around this guy right here, Lucky Clover, draw with the adventure mechanic, and then obviously the adventure mechanic, which allows you to do a lot of things. And Clover's doubling up or tripling or quadrupling up on those pieces. It is Teamer because green, red, blue color grouping gives us Teamer. And again, sideboard. So the keynote here is there are some options again for best of 3. However, most of the stuff is all played through Fae. So typically your best of 1 and best of 3 are going to look pretty similar. Next we have Boros Your Cycling. So this big improvement here. So Boros is traditionally red-white. It's technically, I call it Your because you get access to black and blue as well. And we got access to that in terms of this great new mechanic called Modal Lands. Here in the cycle deck. And what does that mean? So first off, cycling is a mechanic that's very important from Ikoria. This deck revolves around it, and the big payoff here is Zenith Flare. But we still play Lurrus, so we can bring things back. So for those of you that don't know, Lurrus is a companion. We have a constraint, and we also get something from that constraint. So here, each permanent card needs to be mana cost 2 or less, and then during each of our turns, we may cast 1 card from our graveyard that costs 2 or less. Permanent cards, 2 or less. All right, next we are into Omnath. So Omnath here is still a tier 2. It is slow in terms of best of 1, but it's still very, very powerful. It is an Adventures deck because, again, like Teamer Adventures, it does have access to Lucky Clover. We have Giant Killer here and Splashing for white, and a few other things to really, really propel this deck. Again, after Uro, we mashed Omnath, we mashed Adventures, and we got this. Again, something very nasty. I wasn't surprised that this was actually the case because it made a lot of sense, naturally. Why not take 2 of the best decks in the format and try and make something better? Again, sideboard for you. As we talked about with Fae of Wishes, it's all about accessing some of these things. And then we do have some of those additional sideboard options that we could put in there. All right, next, Mono Green. So Mono Green is a very powerful deck. I like this one a lot. I think the addition of Swarm Shambler is pretty awesome. I like a lot of things that are going on in this deck. It can be a little bit slow at times, which I think, in my opinion, is one of the reasons why it's here. Mono Red is just very quick. There's a lot of answers still to this deck. You can get rid of those big bodies if you can move quickly. So that's an important piece. Nonetheless, this deck is extremely powerful, as I mentioned. It is called Mono Green for a reason, or Mono Green Stompy because we got a lot of big creatures, and that is why. So next, we got the sideboard again. This is all here. One big piece that I do want to call here is Chainweb Ragnar. You guys have seen me play this in a few decks now. I love this card as a sideboard option, particularly against rogues, and that's one of the reasons why it's there. All right. Next, we got the rise of Rakdos midrange. So I know a lot of you have seen me talk about this one. This particular video of this deck had a lot of great responses. This was one of the Red Bull winners from France. Huge payoff here, as it did take down Omnath decks, took first. And that's an outcome of, again, shift in meta, or recognizing hey, everyone's playing Omnath. What is one of the best decks to beat it? This deck is a very powerful deck. It can, again, be slow in terms of best of one, so that is why it is a tier 2. And here is the list of sideboard cards. Oh, and it's Rakdos midrange. So I should have covered that, sorry, because of the red-black color schema here. And then midrange versus aggro, you can see a lot more powerful cards at the 3+ slot, but really it gets powerful at that 4 spot. Next, is it tempo? So going into tier 3, we got is it tempo first. I think this deck is a very viable option. I think it can maybe be changed up a little bit, but it is very aggressive, moves quickly. You can get draw moving, you can get some of your smoothing going. I really like Magmatic Chandler. The access to Stormwing Entity is still very powerful, being able to play that turn 3. So lots of good considerations here for those of you that are new. Is in my opinion, or well, not my opinion, fact, blue and red schema. And then tempo is really about keeping pace. So this is kind of why it's set up in that perspective. This one can also be called spells, because the majority of cards in this deck are spells. But tempo is really about making sure you're staying on pace on your curve and dropping and those kinds of things, and getting hand smoothing and deck access kind of a thing. All right, Esper Doom. So this deck I really like a lot. I love Dance of the Mans. Lots of cool things. I could definitely be optimized for best of one. I'm not a fan of Confounding Conundrum necessarily in right off the bat. However, the draw with this entry is nice. I think the argument here is with the egg. In terms, you could play this over the egg and still get the draw, but the egg gives you access to life gain as well if you need it. So just a couple of things to consider. But I really enjoy this deck. Again, this is one of those ones that we've begun to see kind of making more of a splash or impact, as well as actually Orzhov Doom. So those are a couple things. And then here's the sideboard again. All right, next we got Selesnya counters. So I really like Selesnya counters. I think this thing is going to move better or perform better in the ladder, maybe hopefully over time. I think it's very powerful. The Swarm Shambler here is great in this deck. We got Luminarch, lots of cool things. Oran Reef Ooze is something else, man. I really like this card and this deck just in particular. So I think there's a lot of options here. I think it will do well. Again, best of 3, like I mentioned, the particular player with this deck ran 62%. But again, best of 3 is different than best of 1, so we got to keep that separate. And then here's that sideboard option, that Chainweb Arachnar again. All right, last but not least, we have Jeskai Spells here to finish it out. So this Jeskai Spells deck, I think Jeskai's got a little bit more tweaking to go. In the field right now, it's not necessarily heavily played. But I think it could be a good option. This particular one really looks like a Is It Spells deck, but we do splash for Vadrok Apex of Thunder. So Planeswalkers, that is what we have in terms of the Jeskai Spells deck. Here's the list. Jeskai is because it's blue, red, white, and then Spells obviously because most of the deck is spells. Counters is Selesnya counters because it's green white, and the key mechanics are counters. And then Esper Doom is particular to, again, white, blue, black, but then the Doom Foretold card is what drives that deck as well. So I did briefly forget to mention those. I apologize. It is getting a little late here and I'm getting a little tired. So With that said, Planeswalkers, I hope you've enjoyed this. I certainly do. I think it's important. I really, really love producing this content for you. I can't tell you enough. I spent a lot of time researching decks. I spent a lot of time playing decks. I know many of you ask me lots of questions. I love chatting with you through comments, and even this week being able to play a subscriber. So shout out to AFX there. So thank you guys. Truly, if you got questions or comments, please let me know down below. I'm here to help. Additionally, deck lists are available down below. If you want to see a consolidated spot, please check out my website. Again, I host that myself. And then what else? I hope you enjoyed, again, the kind of new format. Please give me feedback. I really, really like hearing from you and some of those new ideas that I have. I want to test those out. And then third, what you think of the observations. It'd be good to hear about that as well, or those things you've noticed. And then lastly, if you disagree, let me know. If you love it, let me know. But again, as always, I want to say thank you. I appreciate your support. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel down over there. Additionally, if you like the video, please like it. You can follow me or you can like me on Facebook. You can also follow me on Twitter and Twitch. And just to kind of go full circle here, Planeswalkers, truly, I hope you enjoy this season. I know there are frustrations in the community, and I apologize. Whether you're one of those that is frustrated or feel like, so I'm moving down, Omnath. So anyway, I feel like a lot of players do get upset. I know there's a huge influx of new players. Word from me on that. It can always be frustrating, but over time things tend to right out, and that's just kind of my opinion. And I truly enjoy this game. I've been playing for a very, very long time. I appreciate the digital format. I think it's also, as I like to say, if people are frustrated, you're also going to rally together as a community, and there's always good things about that as well. So you technically, you kind of have a common enemy there, everyone. But anyway, with that said, I think we'll see again. I know Omnath Adventures is heavily played this weekend for some tournaments, and depending on what happens, maybe there's going to be another banning. Who knows? I didn't think they're going to pull Omnath out right away, but if they do something different, they may not ban Omnath altogether. They may ban some of the enabler cards in that space. But again, just my opinion. I think it's important. I don't like to get frustrated when I can. Obviously, you guys watch my content. I try to be pretty even keel there. But I want people to know that there are many of us out there that care, and always look for, at least me in particular, I try and promote a healthy community, healthy responses, healthy sharing, and all those things, because it needs to be a fun place. Otherwise, people part ways and do something else. So anyway, enough rambling for me. I love the tier list. I hope you guys love it too. This is one of my favorite things. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and I'm rambling on because I'm getting tired, so I gotta go to bed. All right, Planeswalkers, as always, please stay safe. Stay tuned, because there's more content coming your way. Mithras out.